Hey there, good evening. Nice to see you. We got a great show this evening. We're going to do two authors who have written books about topics of interest to you. Our second segment, we have a former police officer who got some very, very interesting intrigue about his career as a NYPD officer, and he wrote a book about it in the 52nd precinct in the Bronx. So we'll do that in our second segment. But in our first segment, let's see, a veteran New York-based journalist and broadcaster who's written about the media for the Daily News, Broadcasting and Cable, and Barrett News Media. He's a news editor currently at patch.com on Long Island. Well, hello to Jerry Barmash. Nice to meet you.
Gary, thanks so much for having me. Great to be here.
So the book is And Now the News.
Here Now
the News, which we can see right up. I guess that's to your, I don't know if it's broadcast, so it's to your right or to your left.
Yeah, my left.
But tell me about what inspired you, because it is a very detailed piece about news anchors in New York City, people that we have all watched for years. What got you the idea that maybe this was worth a book, which it was?
Yeah, and it's interesting. I didn't know initially if it was. I had to see how many interviews I was getting and how many anecdotes I had along the way. And at some point I looked back and it was almost surreal. I'm like, wow, there's something here. There's a book here. Because, you're in a bubble. You're doing this and you're like, I'm interested. My wife is interested. And I know some people on Facebook who are in broadcasting would be interested. But after that, I'm like, is this something that will actually not even sell, but is this something that would, gain attention, gain interest? And I think there's something there. And the New York is interesting because it's about the legends of New York TV news over the decades. Really goes back to the 60s in the book, and the focus becomes the 70s. But I tell people that you don't have to know the names Grimsby or Butel or Simmons or Scarborough or Anastas or Jensen or whoever. I think these anecdotes are kind of universal.
Listen, they're unbelievable. There's so much in there, and there's unbelievable stuff in there. You mentioned that you did it through interviews, which was clear. What was the access, or did you say, hi, I'm writing a book, can I pop by and hang out with you and learn about everything that you know? or were you, because you're a media guy, were you involved in some of the stations? You work at the stations? Did you have relationships with any of these people, or were you really going out there as a reporter?
Good question. I didn't meet most of them. Most of them were on the phone. And some of the people I had connections with already from being in the media. I've either written about media or been in radio for a number of years. I've connected on social media over the years. So there was a connection to people. And then a lot of this there was an old commercial in the 70s for shampoo. You'll tell two friends and they'll tell two friends, and so on and so on. And there was a lot of that. I would tell somebody what I was doing, and they didn't know where it was going to go, but they liked the idea of it going down memory lane. And they said, you should speak to this news director, or I can get you in touch with this.
So this was interesting to me, because it's so intimate and there's so many details of, one day we were sitting at the desk and he cursed at me, or whatever it was that you got. All of that was done through interviews. That's fascinating, because normally it's kind of like you were there, you saw it happen, then you ask somebody afterwards. But so that's what really, this was like an interview book. You deserve a lot of credit.
Yeah, I interviewed 65 people for this. Easily. Yeah. And a lot of these people, either the main ones aren't around anymore, the Jensens, Butel and Grimsby. Yes. But others that I interviewed for the book also have passed on. And I am so pleased that I was able to probably have for their last interviews. Frank Field, for example, Al Primo, who created Eyewitness News.
Eyewitness News, yeah. What was your fascination with anchors? Or did you just think it's kind of a nice idea and I think I'll write a book about it? Or was there something for you that said, "Ooh, this is compelling"?
Well, first of all, I've been in radio for years, not TV, but there was something, even when I was a kid and I was in the mid 70s, I was not even a teenager yet. I was born in '68. There was something about these anchor men, and they primarily were all anchor men. And we
which
talk
is
about
one of
that
the
in the
very
book.
big issues in the book. But
Yeah.
yes, go ahead.
And while I'm going, even as a kid, even young and watching, and I realize in those early days, those formative years, if you will, that there's something. They say is there something there was something
There's
there.
something there. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
I
And,
felt it.
what was interesting is and one thing that you said really at the beginning of the book is that every family had their station. And I was thinking, because now I watch Channel 4 a lot, frankly. But when I was a kid, my parents watched Channel 2. So I saw Jim Bouton doing the sports, and Ron Swoboda, I think, was on CBS. I mean, always been a sports fan. But when you mentioned Roland Smith, I was like, yeah, I could still see that guy, So there was really a lot of that kind of memory. And I'm sure other people maybe our age or otherwise would appreciate it. The other question that was burning in me, and now I'm thrilled that I get the opportunity to ask you, were they thrilled with the outcome? In other words, I'm just going to say it. You mentioned that Sue Simmons used the C word a lot, and I mean, I don't know. Did somebody call you and say, you have some freaking nerve? How do you put that in a book? Or because there's such public people that what the hell? Let them learn what's going on. Have you gotten that kind of feedback of people saying, wait a minute, what did you expose us all? That kind of thing?
No, I haven't heard anyone,
Oh, good.
Sue or otherwise. No one has said, why did you do that? And that's interesting about that word. I was tempted. It's a warts and all kind of portrayal. I'm trying to show that these people were humans, even though they were legends. And I hope that it shows as a labor of love what I thought of these people. And I was conflicted. Should I put that word in there? And I thought, you know what? This is showing what the newsroom was like, what these people were, that they were characters. And
Right.
I thought it was important to put it in.
And if I'm going to tell the truth, I gotta tell the truth. I want to ask you. I mentioned to you before, and maybe people in the public who know me from my work at BronxNet don't know, but I did work at Channel 4 for a little while. I mentioned it to you beforehand, so I had interaction with Chuck and Sue and Len Berman and all the others. What wasn't totally clear to me, because Sue Simmons, essentially her contract was not renewed. It, Nobody's ever articulated it, unless I missed it. It wasn't clear in the book. Do we know why they ended her contract? Was it simply that, if you're a woman, you can't start to look old? And she certainly was a singular personality, or is a singular personality. So maybe they said, well, we've had enough. It doesn't fly with the ratings. I mean, I don't know. Do you have any sense of why she was terminated or not renewed?
I mean, it's always, they don't say fire, but it's not renewed, the contract. No, I don't have a specific answer to that. I think it could be also the change of ownership when it became Comcast.
Yes, that could be.
I think it could have been a situation where, looking to just cut a few dollars, more than a few dollars, of course.
Yeah, you talked a lot about the tales of drinking and carousing, and certainly going through the 60s and 70s when they would not put two women together, which is certainly not the case now. You see it all over the place. Um, uh, just tell me a little bit about that and the change that I guess ultimately had to happen, right?
Yeah.
Although the tales that you tell about many of the anchors, someone like Carol Martin and others, were very angry about the way that they had been treated in New York City big TV newsrooms.
Yeah, and I also, it makes me think of this story when Chuck and Sue first started, and chemistry didn't come immediately, and they weren't Chuck and Sue initially. And they, of course, had historic run that broke all records, 32 and a half years. But at the beginning, as I say in the book, Sue, who had that singular personality, she could be a little off the wall, when warranted, and not when there's a serious fire or a murder story. But she could have a little bit more of her personality, which is shine through in different ways and different times. She was told that she could show that exuberant, let's say,
right. They liked that in the beginning,
but she was told that she could only do that, not how we are now in a 2-shot. She could only do it on the 1-shot
when she was alone. So it didn't.
So it was, because it would be kind of guilty by association, and they didn't want Chuck to be involved in it.
I don't want to run out of time, but the Harry Reasoner, Barbara Walters relation. Imagine being disrespectful to Barbara Walters. I mean, I can't. And Harry Reasoner was so well respected. And I'm going to quote from the book. He would go every night across the street before the show and have, I guess, a couple of beers with guys. It was an all boys club, and they would talk about how terrible I was, referring to Barbara Walters after she had gotten, the anchor job over there. Just incredible. There's so much I want to ask you about. We only have a couple of minutes. Roger Grinsby was a much larger figure in the news community than we were all aware of, as far as I know. I mean, I was Channel 2, not Channel 7, but he was a big guy in a way.
Yeah, he was. And, if I can switch quickly, who I found that was really beloved by the people I interviewed, the people in the business over the years, was Tom Snyder. That was the one that everybody singularly, just all to a man or a woman, thought was the most professional, the best news anchor. And a lot of people may not realize that he had done news anchoring in New York.
I have to tell you, I forgot all about it, again, because I was focused on Channel 2 when I was growing up. And of course, I knew him from the Tomorrow Show, interviewing John Lennon and all the other things he had done. But I had forgotten about that. Listen, we're going to run out of time. Here Now the News is the book. And folks, it's wherever books are sold, you get them online. You can find it anywhere you want. So congratulations for writing something that really, really opened my eyes up. And I've been in broadcasting. This is my 48th year in broadcasting. So I mean, I've seen a lot of different stuff. Final question: you have a favorite anchor, either now or from back then? Somebody that you just think the world of, regardless of whether they drink before the show or not?
I have to give longevity and the way that he handled breaking news. I have to give it to Chuck Scarborough.
Yeah. Okay. We'll accept that, ladies and gentlemen, from the guy who wrote Here Now the News. I recommend it. I spent a lot of time with it, especially over this holiday weekend when I had the time to read it. And Jerry Barmash, thank you so much for joining us. Here Now the News. And I will tell people a sneak preview on our other show, Bronx Talk. Jerry's going to come on. We're going to talk about the death of WCBS radio, and we'll do that sometime in October. Jerry, it's a pleasure. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Okay, we're going to take a short break, and then we'll do another book. We haven't ever done that before, and this will be an inside look of the 52nd precinct in the borough of the Bronx. Fascinating inside look. Don't go away. We'll be right back. Okay, back with you on the Bronx Buzz. What a great segment that was. And this is going to be a great segment also. As I said, we're doing 2 books today. That was about TV news anchors. This one about the NYPD, probably in a way that you have never seen it or heard it heard about it, because this book is an inside look at a police officer's career who ultimately worked at the 52nd precinct. So let me welcome in retired NYPD police officer Luis Rivera. Nice to see you, Luis.
Yes, thank you. Thank you for having me.
And you are the author of The 52nd. This is a very detailed work. I mean, and it goes way back. At what point in your life or in your career did you say, hey, I ought to write a book? Because there's a lot in here that recounts a lot of what you did. When did you say, hey, this deserves a book?
Well, it's kind of weird because most people do a book like a year or 2 years after they're retired, but it took a few years. I actually, because I was doing other writings elsewhere, and I said, I should write something of my experience, especially growing up, wanting to become a cop. And sure enough, I asked my wife, what do you think? And she said, go for it, and that's exactly what I did. And there it is.
So had you been a writer beforehand, or?
No, I was writing other stuff.
So you were a writer then?
Well, I
maybe not formally.
Yeah, exactly. There you go.
And what about, just before we get into some of the things in the book, what about the writing of it? Was it difficult to remember a lot of stuff? Did you have to sit there and really kick yourself and say, hey, what happened? Or is so much of it, front and center in your memory that it was easy to kind of spit it out, quote unquote, spit it out?
Yeah, I think it was a combination of both. It was front and center memories, and I had to go back to my what we call the memo book, where we write our daily logs and entries and stuff. So I had to go back way back in the 90s in that to kind of reflect on certain locations.
Yeah.
There it is.
And there it is. And so you worked at what I found was interesting. There were a number of things that I found fascinating. What I really found fascinating was the time it takes for a rookie cop to kind of get into it, because they don't want to put you out in the front lines in the most difficult spots. Of course, that would be dangerous for everybody.
Right.
But it did take years really for you to say, well, I was just a rookie cop, and so they kind of treated me like a rookie cop, and at big events I would be in charge of kind of standing there and watching the door, so to speak, or something like that. Yeah. So that was very interesting. But there is that moment where you found out that the department was not run by Boy Scouts, and your initial objective of being a police officer was to do the right thing, and you by and large did that, of course, your whole career. But was that a hard thing to learn, and kind of like a child learns that, wow, mommy and daddy may not be as great as we thought they were, kind of thing,
Yeah, but I kind of expected that any treatment, I kind of expected it, and especially when they say, here, look at kid here, this is how we do this. I expected all that, and I didn't expect any less. And in fact, I even welcomed that, because that's what it is when you start at a low level position in any job. So I took my cue from the older guys, from the senior guys, and many guys were actually willing to help, and they did help me, and I learned a lot.
The thing that came out, and I'm interested in this because you said, right, I mean, you're a Bronx boy and a New York City police officer, so you have no problem saying what you think, but you were pretty critical of people. Now, you didn't name some of the cops that you really thought had done the wrong thing, but you talked about the drinking on the job and white cops. You made it very clear that there was racism out there, cops chasing women and all that kind of stuff. I'm just curious, have you gotten any feedback from either former colleagues or anybody who said, hey, wait a minute, you can't tell everybody about all this stuff that goes on?
Actually, no, but even that I may welcome, and on an open forum anytime, because my objective to the book was not to name names or to pinpoint the negativity, but to explain in an overall view how some of the departments were, how some of the officers were, and not all officers were the same.
If you complain, I mean, these are things that those of us in the general public have heard about, right? We all have heard stories that happen in the NYPD. Of course, the bigger issues, of course, end up on on the front page of the Daily News or the New York Post. But you made it clear if you complain, you get red flagged, and the department labels you a problem child.
Yes.
And you've been through that. Can you ever get past that as a police officer? Can you ever earn your way back? Or there's so much infrastructure at the top and at the top of a precinct that they're like, all right, we don't want to give this guy any plum, assignments.
Yeah, I can speak for all officers, but I would say this: you do get over it, and you start developing your own methods of doing things on the job, and you choose and pick certain friends within the job and or out of the job. But the most important thing is that I never went to a boss and say, hey, this is what's going on, because you never do that.
Because then you would really be labeled a problem child.
Exactly. So I took other avenues. I started hanging out more on my own. I was one to do, in the beginning, I was very active, but then it came to a time I said, you know what? I got to do the least, or at least the minimum that is required of me, which I did. And my favorite thing towards the end of my tour was hanging out and having my first drink.
So, well, that's another thing I wanted to bring up. And I thought this was really, really interesting, that if you are a police officer and you have issues, personal issues, and this is all I got out of the book,
right.
And you have personal issues for yourself, whether a problem in your marriage, financial problems, maybe you come from a difficult background. I mean, it could be anything. I mean, police officers are like the rest of us. We all got issues that are unrelated, and you seek help for those, and you want to have those things not affect your performance when you're in the streets, and of course dealing with some of the most difficult issues out there. If you say that, then they label you as somebody unfit for office.
Correct.
That's got to be a difficult thing, because we all have issues. Goodness gracious.
Yeah, but you know what? You said it right. Unfit, because the job doesn't really look out for the officer individually. The job looks out for. They make sure you got your numbers at that time, your quota, and that you was carrying your load, your weight, so to speak, and that's it. And you kept it moving. And during the interim of that, or at least in my career, I did all that. I did the heavy drinking. I did the hanging out. My first marriage was on the rocks. And it's like your best friend was maybe the guy who was next to you at the bar drinking with you.
And so, as opposed to being able to say, even, hey, I need to talk to somebody. But the minute you do that, all of a sudden it kind of has some, effect on your job.
Correct.
And you listen, I'm just going to pull out a quote. The captain pretended to be a friend, but in the end, he became a backstabbing weasel. That's pretty strong stuff. And so I guess in addition to, I hate to put it this way, in addition to fighting crime and it's not only crime, sometimes it's people wanting to jump off a building, and you've been there and you've saved those people.
Yes.
But you've got to really take care of yourself. I mean, as a police officer, and work with people or be friends with people who you can really trust. Right? I mean, am I getting that right?
Yes. It's more like, at first you think that drinking is all the fun and the fun and games, and there you are. But as time goes on, and you have years under your belt, you start realizing and say, hey, wait a minute, I got to look out for myself, because no one is going to help me or look out for me in that sense. So in time, it's not that I try to put myself to get into issues, but I got into issues where it was beyond my control, that everybody thought, hey, this guy's a problem child. But in reality, I wasn't. No one asked me, hey, what's going on? How do you, what happened here? So
right. And you established literally from the first chapter that you did this because you really loved the notion of being a cop. You wanted to be a cop. You really wanted to help people.
Yes.
And there were many, and you had some successes, and some things didn't quite work out.
Yeah.
And I just want to remind people, the book is called The 52nd.
Yes.
If you're a Bronx person, number one, you will appreciate the guy's honesty. he didn't mince words. He doesn't mince words with me, and he's straight and upfront about what he does. But you ultimately, and I was very surprised by the end of the book, you ultimately were given a choice that because they didn't like you, or because they felt that you were, I guess, a troublemaker or somewhat unfit because of your personal issues, and they told you to either retire or you will lose if you fight it, you'll lose your pension. That's a tough
because
decision to make.
The job itself has a court system, which most of us call it the kangaroo court, and it's like you don't need to be 100% guilty. All you need is 50%, 25% of being guilty, and there it is. I didn't want to risk it to take that to that court, so I took my losses. I got my pension. I lost certain things, certain benefits to go along with it, but that's okay because I believe in this higher being, and God carried me through all the rest of the way.
I thought it was fascinating that you also made it quite clear, and I thought it was a great idea that it should be a high school requirement so that the high school students visit a prison so the kids can see what awaits them. If God forbid they do the wrong thing. I thought that was a really interesting thing. I don't know if it can ever come true. I don't know that.
Well, it did come true in the late 70s, early 80s. They had a program called Scare Straight, and
wow.
they took kids to these prisons, and it got them straight.
So therapeutic to write the book. We're just about out of time. I want to just remind people the book is called The 52nd. It was good for you to write it. You felt good about writing it?
Yeah, I did.
And you so regrets at this point, or at this point just moving forward with your life and your retirement?
I'll be honest with you, Gary. No regrets. I had fun writing it, and I'm waiting for some good, further good feedbacks, and I'm here to answer any questions in the near future.
Great. I think it's great. I want to recommend it to the people of the Bronx because there's so much talk about crime and stopping crime and who the police officers are. This is a police officer, a Hispanic police officer, grew up in the Bronx, understands the Bronx, knows who we are, and became a cop and told everything about it. And it was just a fascinating read, really because of its honesty. So, Officer Rivera, thank you so much for for writing a really important piece of work for the people of the Bronx, and of course for joining us in the Bronx Buzz.
Thank you.
Okay, we will say goodnight then, and we appreciate both Luis and Jerry for joining us. And if the curtain don't fall and the creek don't rise, we'll be here next week. Good night.